Your brother's wedding is the family's priority. We can't come to yours, Mom said. I replied, That's fine. They had no idea I owned a six-star villa in Monaco. When they saw the photos of our ceremony, they couldn't breathe. I was reviewing seating charts for the reception when Dad's text came through. Your brother's wedding is the family priority. We won't be making it to yours. No emoji, no apology, just 7 words that felt like a verdict. It landed differently than I expected, like watching a door close in slow motion, knowing you'll never open it again. I didn't call him back. I just stared at those words, typed understood, and shut my laptop. 10 days later, while they were celebrating Derek's big day in Nashville, the world discovered something they never bothered to ask about. My ceremony was already happening on the terraces of my own $6 million villa overlooking the Mediterranean in Monaco. And when those photos went viral, the silence from Tennessee said everything they couldn't. Before I tell you how it all unfolded, let me know in the comments where you're listening from, because sometimes the people who should show up for us simply never do. When people ask what growing up in the Harrison household was like, I never quite know where to begin. From the outside, we were the definition of success. Holiday cards with professional photography, coordinated outfits, smiles practiced enough to fool anyone scrolling past. But if you paid close attention, you'd notice the pattern. Every achievement, every milestone, every celebration somehow circled back to my younger brother, Derek. He was the sun our family orbited around. I was the gravity, invisible but keeping everything from falling apart. I used to think it was normal, the way Mom's entire face transformed when Derek walked into a room. How Dad would spend entire dinners talking about Derek's lacrosse championships. When I brought home academic awards or got promoted at 25 to senior analyst, they'd offer a quick, "That's nice, honey," before steering conversation back to Derek's latest adventure. Mom had this phrase she'd repeat. "You're fortunate, Autumn. Success just comes naturally to your brother." That word, fortunate, always felt like a slap. It erased every late night, every sacrifice, every hour I'd spent proving myself in a field dominated by men twice my age. There's a photo wall in my parents' den that tells the story better than I ever could. Row after row of Derek. Derek scoring the winning goal, Derek at homecoming, Derek graduating from state. I appear maybe 3 times, always in the background, sometimes literally cut off at the frame's edge. When I was 17, I found a family photo where I'd been standing right beside him at Aunt Caroline's wedding. But in the version they'd framed, my face had been cropped out entirely. Dad said it was about better composition. I didn't argue. I just stopped expecting to be in the frame at all. My grandmother Vivian was the only one who saw through it. She'd pull me aside at family gatherings, her hand warm on my shoulder, whispering, "Don't you worry, sweetheart. Some folks only recognize what's loud. The quiet ones change the world." She had this way of making you feel seen without needing explanations. But favoritism doesn't detonate overnight. It seeps in gradually, like water damage behind walls, until silence becomes safer than speaking up. By the time we reached adulthood, the imbalance had become its own language. When Derek forgot my 30th birthday, Mom called it just Derek being Derek. When he borrowed $5,000 and never mentioned repayment, Dad said, "He's still figuring out his path." So when the wedding text arrived, I wasn't shocked. It simply confirmed what I'd always known deep down. I'd spent 3 decades being the flexible one, the understanding one, the one who bent so everyone else could remain comfortable. But that afternoon, sitting in my downtown Chicago apartment staring at Dad's message, something fundamental shifted inside me. For once, I refused to bend. I looked around my space, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan, the scent of bergamot candles I'd lit to calm my racing thoughts. My wedding invitations sat in elegant cream boxes on the console table, each one hand-calligraphed with gold ink. I'd imagined them displayed proudly on my parents' mantel. Now I imagine them buried under Derek's glossy save the dates, forgotten like everything else I'd ever accomplished. Yet beneath the familiar ache, something new was forming. A quiet clarity, a realization that this moment was offering me something precious. Permission to stop begging for a place at a table that had never truly set a seat for me. 3 days after that text, Derek called like nothing had happened. His voice had that easy confidence, the tone of someone who'd never been told no. Autumn, you won't believe this. The venue we wanted, the Gibson Estate, had a cancellation. Same weekend as your thing. But that works out, right? You're in Chicago, we're in Nashville. It's like fate. Fate. He actually used that word, like he'd just quoted an inspirational poster. For several seconds, I couldn't form words. I just listened to the sound of him chewing gum through the phone and realized he was waiting for my congratulations. That's wonderful, Derek, I said, keeping my voice neutral. Really perfect timing. He laughed. I knew you'd get it. You've always been the reasonable one. Reasonable. That was my assigned role in the family narrative. Steady, dependable, predictable. The one they could lean on while they celebrated his every whim. The following evening, Mom called. Her voice carried that careful cadence she used when delivering disappointment she didn't want to feel guilty about. Sweetheart, about the wedding dates. Derek's fiance's family can only do that specific weekend. She's very sensitive about family attendance, and it would mean everything if you could be flexible. Flexible. Another word that had defined my entire existence. So you want me to change my wedding date? I asked quietly. Mom hesitated. We're just thinking it would be simpler for everyone. You're so independent, Autumn. You understand these things. The irony almost made me laugh out loud. Simpler for them. For him. Not once had she asked what it would cost me, what I'd already invested, what this day meant. Mom, you promised you'd be there, I said slowly. She sighed, long and weary, as if I were the one being difficult. It's not about choosing favorites, honey. It's just logistics. That word, logistics, struck deeper than she could have known. Logistics was my entire career, the field where I'd built a multi-million-dollar consulting firm from nothing. Logistics meant precision, planning, integrity, fairness. But in my family's vocabulary, it was just another euphemism for betrayal. That night, I called my father. He answered with his characteristic measured tone. Autumn, you know how your brother is. If we miss his wedding, he'll never let us forget it. You've always been the strong one. I pressed my tongue against my teeth until I tasted copper. So it's my responsibility to understand again? He didn't respond. I ended the call before I said something irreversible. For a long time, I sat in darkness. The only sounds were the hum of my wine fridge and the clock marking time past midnight. Light from my engagement ring caught the edge of my glass, scattering reflections across the wall like fragments of something I'd been trying to hold together for too long. That's when everything crystallized. I realized my family wasn't cruel in obvious, dramatic ways. Their weapon was subtraction, leaving me out of photos, out of conversations, out of priority lists. I'd been conditioned to interpret their absence as a form of love. Not anymore. I opened my laptop, pulled up my saved travel folders, and clicked on a listing I'd bookmarked 6 months earlier. A 19th-century villa in Monaco, perched on cliffs above the Mediterranean. The photos looked like something from a dream. Honey-colored stone, wrought iron balconies, gardens cascading toward turquoise water. If they wouldn't show up for me, I'd create something they could never ignore. The next morning, I booked a one-way flight to Nice. No announcement, no family group text, no theatrical exit. Just one decision made in silence. When the plane descended over the Côte d'Azur, the light was different than anywhere I'd ever seen. Softer, more forgiving, like the sky itself was offering absolution. I rented a Mercedes convertible and drove along winding coastal roads, past villages clinging to mountainsides, until I reached the villa I'd only seen in photographs. It exceeded every expectation. Stone walls weathered by centuries, olive trees older than my grandparents, terraces overlooking an endless expanse of blue. The property manager, an elegant woman named Colette, handed me an ornate key and said in accented English, "This house has been waiting for someone who truly sees it." For the first time in months, I felt genuinely seen. Inside, the air held the scent of lavender and history, like the walls remembered every celebration they'd ever witnessed. As I moved through each room, I understood this wasn't just a property, it was possibility, a chance to rebuild my story without anyone editing me out of the narrative. Over the following weeks, I threw myself into restoration. I hired local craftsmen who treated every detail like sacred work, the sound of hammers and Italian conversations mixed with the cry of seagulls. Each evening, I'd sit on the main terrace with my planning notebook, designing the ceremony space. One long table under a canopy of wisteria, strings of lights overhead. No head table. No hierarchy, just one gathering place for everyone who chose to be present. The locals started calling me La Americana Tranquila, the quiet American. I liked that. My silence wasn't weakness anymore. It was intention. When I video called my fiancé Harrison and explained my plan, he didn't question my sanity. He just said, "If this is what peace looks like for you, I'm completely in." And for the first time in my entire life, I believed someone actually meant those words. 10 days later, I began sending new invitations. Not the formal embossed ones I'd originally ordered, but handmade cards on textured paper with pressed lavender tucked inside. Handwritten, personal, genuine. The first went to my cousin Natalie, who'd never once forgotten my birthday in 32 years. Then to Grandma Vivian, who'd always seen through the family's illusions. One by one, responses arrived. Natalie called me first, her voice thick with emotion. "We heard what happened. Aunt Patricia told the whole family Derek's wedding was the main event. We're done pretending, Autumn. Send us every detail. We'll be there." Her voice cracked halfway through, not from pity, but from loyalty that had been waiting years to be acknowledged. By the end of that week, flights were booked. Grandma sent a voice message. "I've ignored too many important moments in my life, sweetheart. I'll be in Monaco with bells on." The group text they created called itself The Real Family Table. Photos of boarding passes, suitcases, and celebration emojis filled my phone. For the first time in memory, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt chosen. And somewhere between the olive groves and the smell of fresh plaster, I understood this wasn't revenge, this was revelation. Meanwhile, back in Nashville, preparations for Derek's wedding continued with increasing tension. The venue was spectacular, the guest list impressive, but something felt off. Mom stood in the Gibson Estates grand ballroom, reviewing seating charts with the coordinator. "Vivian Harrison, front row center," the coordinator confirmed. "Perfect," Mom said, though her smile felt forced. She hadn't heard from Grandma Vivian in over a week, which was unusual. Every call went to voicemail. Dad was having similar trouble reaching the extended family. Natalie wasn't responding. Uncle Raymond had sent a vague text about prior commitments. Aunt Patricia claimed a sudden conflict. "Maybe everyone's just busy," Derek said dismissively when Mom voiced concerns. "It's not like Autumn's wedding is competition." But Mom felt an uneasiness she couldn't name, like standing on ice that was just beginning to crack beneath her feet. The morning both weddings arrived under different skies, two worlds were about to collide in ways no one anticipated. In Nashville, humidity hung heavy over the city. The Gibson estate gleamed under crystal chandeliers, but there was a hollowness even the florist's elaborate arrangements couldn't fill. Half the expected guests hadn't arrived. Mom stood near the entrance in her champagne-colored dress, smiling too brightly, pretending not to notice the empty spaces. Dad checked his phone compulsively, then the entrance, then his phone again. "Maybe there's traffic," he muttered. But his voice lacked conviction. Inside, Derek adjusted his bow tie for the fourth time. His groomsmen exchanged uncomfortable glances. "Where's Grandma Vivian?" one asked. "Doesn't she usually sit front row?" Derek's confident smile wavered. "She's probably just running late," he said, but uncertainty crept into his voice. The photographer moved tactfully, repositioning the sparse crowd to make the ballroom look fuller. "Perhaps we could have everyone shift forward?" he suggested gently. "Sure," Derek said, forcing a laugh, but his hand trembled slightly as he straightened his boutonniere. Across the Atlantic, that same sun rose over Monaco, gilding the Mediterranean in shades of rose gold. My villa glowed like something from a fairy tale. Stone terraces wrapped in flowering vines, lanterns swaying in the salt breeze. The long table stretched beneath an ancient wisteria canopy, lined with candles, wildflowers, and ceramic plates created by local artisans. Natalie's twin daughters chased each other through the garden paths. Her husband Lucas tested his guitar, softly playing a jazz melody. Grandma Vivian sat in the front row holding a small sprig of lavender she'd picked that morning. "For new beginnings," she'd said. I stood inside, looking through the open French doors. My wedding dress wasn't elaborate or theatrical, just silk the color of champagne, simple and elegant, catching the afternoon light. Colette, who'd become a dear friend during the restoration, pinned fresh lavender into my hair and whispered, "Pour la bonne fortune et la vérité," for good fortune and truth. When I stepped onto the terrace, the breeze lifted my veil. Every guest turned, faces glowing in golden light. Grandma Vivian stood first, her eyes bright with tears she didn't try to hide. "There's my girl," she said softly, and for the first time in my life, I truly believed her. There was no orchestra, no choreographed entrance, just Lucas's guitar, the whisper of wisteria, and the presence of people who had chosen to be there. As I walked down the stone path between the chairs, I thought about every empty seat that had once represented absence, forgotten birthdays, unattended graduations, silences I'd mistaken for peace. But here, every seat was filled. Every face met mine with unwavering presence. The officiant, a friend of Colette's who spoke beautiful English with a French lilt, began, "Love is not measured by how many are invited, but by who shows up when it matters." The words sank into me like roots finding soil. When my turn came to speak, I didn't read from paper. My vows emerged like breath. "To everyone who shows up," I began, my voice steady, "this love is for you. For those who believed in me before I ever proved I was enough. For the ones who stayed when it wasn't convenient." Natalie wiped her eyes. Grandma Vivian nodded slowly, whispering, "That's my girl." When the ceremony concluded, applause rose, not thunderous but warm, genuine, alive. The courtyard filled with laughter and the aroma of truffle risotto and rosemary. Colette's catering team emerged carrying platters of handmade pasta and roasted vegetables with herbs from our own garden. The lanterns flickered on as twilight painted the sky in shades of lavender and gold. It wasn't perfect. It was real. Halfway through dinner, Natalie showed me her phone with a conspiratorial smile. "It's already happening," she said. Photos had begun circulating through the extended family group chats, candles glowing on our long table, the villa's stone terraces framed by wisteria, Grandma Vivian laughing with Lucas's arm around her shoulder, the Mediterranean sunset painting everything in impossible colors. Within 2 hours, those images reached Nashville. At the Gibson estate, Derek was posing for formal portraits with his new wife when one of the groomsmen gasped, scrolling frantically through his phone. "Wait, isn't that your grandmother?" he said, voice rising. "They're in Monaco?" "What?" Derek frowned, grabbing the phone. On the screen was a photo of me and Harrison standing on our terrace, Monaco's coastline glittering behind us, our intimate gathering glowing with warmth. Grandma Vivian raising a champagne flute, Natalie's girls throwing flower petals that caught the golden light. Derek's face drained of color. The photographer lowered his camera awkwardly. Around them, whispers started circulating like wildfire. Is that Uncle Raymond? I thought they were supposed to be here. Didn't Natalie RSVP yes months ago? Mom leaned over Dad's shoulder, eyes narrowing at the screen. What is this? Her voice came out strangled. Dad's expression turned to stone. It's Autumn's wedding. They went to hers, Derek said, his voice hollow with disbelief. Mom opened her mouth, but no words emerged. The silence stretched, louder than any argument could have been. Guests shifted uncomfortably. Someone coughed. The band continued playing, trying desperately to fill the sudden tension, but even the music sounded hollow now. When the officiant offered a toast to family unity, not a single person raised their glass. Back in Monaco, laughter rippled through our courtyard as Colette poured wine and said in her charming accent, "Eat, drink, and remember why you came together." Grandma Vivian reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I've waited a lifetime to see this, Autumn," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "This is what family was always supposed to look like." The night deepened into shades of indigo and gold. Someone started a slow song, and guests began dancing barefoot on the ancient stone terrace. For a moment, I stepped away, walking toward the edge of the property where olive trees met the cliff's edge. The air smelled of jasmine and sea salt. Behind me, the villa glowed with life and laughter. My phone buzzed on the table inside. Messages, missed calls, voicemails stacking up. I didn't retrieve it. I didn't need to. In Nashville, Mom's voice shook as she called again, this time leaving a message. "Autumn, how could you do this to us? Everyone's talking about it. We look like complete fools. Your brother's day is ruined." I listened to it the next morning, sipping espresso under the same olive tree where I'd exchanged vows. The sun was rising over the Mediterranean, turning the water to liquid amber. I played the message once more, then deleted it. They thought humiliation was the consequence. It wasn't. The real revelation was that I had moved forward without needing their permission or validation. The photos continued circulating online, shared by cousins, reposted by friends of friends. The image of Grandma Vivian raising her champagne flute became a quiet symbol of our reunion. No captions needed, no explanations required, just truth. For 32 years, they'd cropped me out of their pictures. This time, I didn't need to fight for space in their frame. I'd built my own and filled it with light. The week after the weddings, Monaco fell quiet again. The lanterns came down, the laughter faded into memory, but the air still held the warmth of what we'd created. The long table stood empty now, scattered with dried petals and wine stains, evidence that something real had happened here. One morning, while I was packing away the last decorations, my phone rang. Mom. For a moment, I almost let it go to voicemail. But something inside me said, "Answer, not for them, for yourself." Her voice was shaky, defensive. "Autumn, do you have any idea how embarrassed we were? Everyone at Derek's wedding was talking about your elaborate event in Monaco. You made us look heartless." I took a slow breath, watching Mediterranean light crawl across the terrace floor. "I didn't make you look any way, Mom," I said evenly. "I just gave people the opportunity to see the truth." Silence stretched across the line, then a trembling sigh. "You've always been so cold, Autumn. We were just trying to keep peace in the family." Before I could respond, another voice cut through, Grandma Vivian's. "Patricia, that's enough," she said, firm but calm. "You spent 3 decades asking this girl to make herself smaller for your comfort. Now she finally stood tall. And you're calling it cruelty? No, sweetheart. That's called freedom." Mom said nothing after that. The call ended quietly, like a door closing without drama. I stepped outside. The olive trees swayed gently in the breeze. Colette emerged from the villa's kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. Everything all right, chérie? I smiled genuinely for the first time in days. Better than all right. It's finally quiet in all the right ways. She looked toward the empty table and said softly, Then rest, ma belle. You've earned this peace. That evening, I set one last place at the head of the table, the seat that had always been symbolically empty. I tied a small lavender ribbon around the chair and whispered, For the girl who once waited to be chosen. The wind moved through the wisteria like a gentle sigh, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel forgotten. I felt free. Later, as the sun disappeared behind the hills, I poured a glass of local rosé and thought of Grandma Vivian's words. Love isn't management, darling. It's showing up. She was absolutely right. You don't need to fight for a seat at someone else's table. Build your own, and the right people will find their way to it. If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me where you're listening from. And remember, sometimes the quietest form of justice is simply peace. Subscribe for more stories like this.